If you're on the left, your solution is always the most centralized, top-down, we're all in this together, we're an army of one type of thinking. This is how they think. So it's not that surprising that the only solution they can think of for COVID-19 is to lock everybody in their home. Politicians failed to rationally think through a cost-benefit analysis in many ways when implementing these policies. And people who were lazy thinkers would just scream, science, science, science. And you're like, I'm sorry, where's the scientific formula that tells you what policy to put in place? There isn't one. That's nonsense. And the science is very messy on this. In the midst of a pandemic in real time, talking about complex biology, the science doesn't give you a straight answer. It needs to inform your decision making, but so do many other things. This is a multidisciplinary approach that has to happen. And I think lazy policymakers who just wanted to give in to fear and even promote the fear themselves just felt that they should take the most extreme action possible so that they can never be accused of not doing enough. We should strive to be better and more logical thinkers, but instead we have truly let populist emotions drive our thinking and demanding the most extreme actions from our politicians, or we'll burn them at the stake and say they did nothing. The leaders who are considered leading well seem to be the ones that go up there and fearmonger and use the most amount of emotion possible or blame others. Like, why does Andrew Cuomo in New York have such high marks? It's a really crazy thing. All he ever did was go up there and blame the president for things, or blame his own mayor, or blame somebody else. You know, if you just take a step back and just kind of analytically watch this unfold, it's very perplexing. Leaders need to think of the bigger picture and show good judgment.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Congressman Dan Crenshaw, the American politician, author, and former Navy SEAL. In 2012, during your third deployment with SEAL Team 3, you were hit by an IED explosion in Afghanistan and lost your right eye. After requiring surgery to save your left eye, you went on to complete 2 further tours of duty. For your service, you were awarded 2 Bronze Stars, the Purple Heart, and the Navy Commendation Medal with Valor. In 2018, without any prior political experience or connections, you ran and won the electoral race for the United States House of Representatives in Texas. You've since been appointed to the Homeland Security and Budget Committees. Your new book, Fortitude, American Resilience in the Era of Outrage, is a roadmap for a stronger America, prescribing the antidote to victim culture, trigger warnings, and safe spaces. Congressman Crenshaw, welcome to London Real.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, great to have you here. Before we get started, I just want to announce that we are streaming now on our brand new Digital Freedom platform, which is a censorship-free, independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and it's available exclusively on our website at freedomplatform.tv. Can everybody watching us now please share this link via the sidebar to any and all of your social media channels? Let me just repeat that. Please share this link via the sidebar to all of your social media channels. Just ask your friends and family to give us 15 minutes and then they can decide. Congressman, I pledge to you and everyone watching us that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anybody in the world can watch the full version of this episode free at freedomplatform.tv/Crenshaw. Thanks to the generous donations of over 34,000 people around the world that we affectionately call the London Real Army. For anybody wanting to become a founding member of the Digital Freedom Platform, they can visit freedomplatform.tv/give to donate and fight with us on the front lines to protect our human rights. At London Real, we've been a platform for free speech since 2011. And Congressman, I'm excited to have you here today. Maybe we could start, and I could ask you a couple questions about censorship. I know you've been pretty outspoken. You know, we've had a pretty public battle for the past 4 months. On April 6th, we had the largest, actually the second largest YouTube live stream in the world that day, second only to President Trump's coronavirus briefing. And that episode was subsequently deleted and banned 30 minutes later from YouTube. And we've been in a battle for the last 4 months, having another 100 videos deleted. We've been shadow banned and deplatformed from places like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. And, you know, that didn't happen for 9 years. But now when we talk about COVID or things that seem to upset the left, things are dropping. And I've never had this experience before. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are, something like that. You know, these private companies sometimes kind of hide behind their community policies, but I just find they're very subjective sometimes. And I'm curious what you think about censorship and what you see happening out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly becoming problematic. They hide behind these community standards that are vague and non-objective in every way and can be interpreted a whole number of ways. And it is getting worse, it appears. The left has truly trampled over the fundamentals of liberalism, and unfortunately, liberals haven't noticed. Not enough, anyway. Some have, but not enough. And they'll keep voting in these policies and keep voting in the people that support these policies. We're kind of stuck in America in a sense because of, you know, we as free speech absolutists, the left can actually use that against us. In the sense that, well, the government can't force a private company to do its bidding with respect to what it posts and what it doesn't post and what it allows and doesn't allow on its platform. I don't know. I do think we have to look at the way these platforms are protected, in the sense that they get the best of both worlds as a digital platform and a publishing entity. So that's one line of attack. I don't know how effective it'll end up really being if we can even get to that point where we're passing policy to fix these problems. Deep down, this is a cultural problem, as most problems are. You know, there's only so much that politicians in Washington can really do without infringing on the principles that we're trying to protect in the first place. You know, we have a cultural problem in the West with free speech. In the sense that we're not protecting it dearly the way we used to, when liberal institutions are now no longer protected, like the ACLU. It is now only conservatives that fight for these things. And the general American public has not been educated well on the importance of free speech, the importance of these negative rights that we uphold so dearly. And they're very much willing to say, you know, they kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, it's common sense. I don't want people saying bad racist things online. And they don't understand how the slippery slope works. And they don't understand that in a free and open society, the most crucial thing is the spirit of free speech, and how quickly that degrades into simply into the subjective labeling of anything you disagree with as some form of hate speech, which in itself isn't defined. And so, you know, when Google and these folks were testifying on the Hill, I said, we may not be able to legally make the argument that you must oblige by the First Amendment, but you certainly have an obligation as an American to live up to the spirit of the First Amendment. And don't force us into this position where we have to find a way to stop what you're doing, and maybe make a legal argument that because these entities have such enormous power over what people see, that they in fact pose a greater threat to free speech than the government itself. And the founders could foresee a lot of things. I don't think they ever foresaw that. And so it's very problematic. And right now we have to fight this at the cultural level. People have to want free speech, and I fear that our culture is becoming more and more anti-free speech.
Yeah, I don't think the founders could have seen this coming. I mean, the press traditionally was there to kind of check the government. And yet this is almost like a digital identity. And I think people spend an average of 6 hours online. And And, the U.S. has dealt with monopolies before, whether it's been the steel or the oil industry, but this is a strange type of, entity where it kind of controls who you are digitally. And in times of lockdown, especially here in London, it's the only way to communicate. So then to go ahead and say, now you can't speak of certain things, it's strange. And we're actually taking legal action here because when a private company acts like a public utility, which it kind of does here in the UK, I mean, there's an NHS ad under every single coronavirus video being funded by the government, then maybe you can do a legal argument. But I agree, that's kind of the last resort that you want to use there. But again, these digital companies seem to have taken things to another level that we don't really understand. And I'm guessing the founding fathers couldn't have seen that coming.
Right. And I'm curious how these debates play out in places like the UK, because you don't have a First Amendment.
Correct.
It's a very different environment. It's concerning to me to see what happens in Europe when people are arrested or fined for things they speak about online. I think the way that we enforce the First Amendment in the U.S. is the best way, which is if it directly incites violence, then you can make an argument that that's not protected speech. I think what is considered not to be protected speech, I think is objective legally and based in sound reasoning. But that's only from the government standpoint. We don't have anything to deal with these extremely powerful entities in the private sector. And it's what's interesting. So I guess what's interesting about when I look at the UK is they don't have that sort of catch-22 problem, but you still have the same cultural problem that where people aren't respecting even the philosophy of free speech. But in theory, the government could enforce free speech, at least the spirit of it, in a way that can't happen in the United States. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point you make, and I think that probably is correct. There's Article 10 of the European Convention that kind of addresses it, but it's not as specific as the First Amendment. The only thing that's positive here is if you can prove kind of like a local legal precedent, it could affect the way YouTube or Google behaves globally. That's the only possibility, is that a local law could make them change their policy. And there's like a history with the London Stock Exchange, which is a private company. When it acts as a public utility, it has to actually respect certain rights of the public. So that's an angle you might not be able to pursue with the Supreme Court in America, which is something that we're considering, but that's a longer haul. What also is interesting is it seems like a handful of individuals, literally maybe on one hand, between the Dorseys of the world and the Zuckerbergs and the Google founders or Alphabets, they seem to kind of be dictating this policy. And, I've had talks with my community manager at YouTube. I mean, luckily I can have a call with them because we've been partners there, but it seems like a few people are kind of determining policy, and it's an election year, and it just seems, I don't know, it seems like a very few are controlling speech, and that just seems very dangerous.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, Facebook seems to be the only one that's at least tried to hold the line to an extent. But even obviously, there's still problems there. Google seems to be the worst culprit, as far as I can tell from people's complaints and what we've seen across the board. Twitter as well, but Twitter is less problematic. I think people give Twitter a bit of an outsized due influence. I think most regular people aren't on Twitter. I think a lot more people are on YouTube and Facebook. I don't think that, I know that just from the data. And so that's where this stuff becomes problematic, where, like you said, taking down videos that are very clearly simply a different opinion. This is not inciting any kind of violence or harm against anyone. But they get around that. And see, this is sort of the doublespeak that it's occurred over time, is that they get around that argument by saying, well, speech can be harmful. Speech can be violence. People can be physically hurt by speech. And this is how they've been able to circumvent that and sort of appeal to the kind-hearted liberal sentiments. Again, liberals are being trampled over, because the problem with liberalism is, again, it was always a bit naive in many ways. But as long as liberalism stood for liberal principles, we were okay. That has ceased to happen, and the left is very good at manipulating and then destroying the liberals. Whereas, we need liberals. Liberal conservative arguments are okay. I think that's a healthy balance in a society, but we're not having that balance anymore. Liberals have been trampled over completely. So it seems like conservatives are the only ones fighting for basic liberal values of using reason and science and logic and fact-based investigation and free speech and negative rights. This notion that we have a right to life, liberty, and property, that is being trampled to death by the left, and I don't see liberals standing up for it the way I would like.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very obvious from that over here. Let me ask you a personal question. I mean, did you ever think that your job now would be harder than maybe your job as a SEAL? Because it looks really hard to do what you do. I see all the posts you put out, and you're on social, and you're talking about the cancel culture and the monuments and the COVID and the masks. And man, you seem to be working 24/7, almost fighting an enemy that's more difficult than what you were fighting overseas.
Yeah, I do think it's more difficult. I enjoyed my time in the military quite a bit. That was certainly a little bit more what I was born for. And I never would have left the military if I'd had a choice. So it's, what we view as hard in this life, I guess, is the relative term, right? Most people would think that life as a SEAL would definitely be harder, but it depends on what you're good at, right? It depends on your own skill sets and character. But this is definitely difficult. You are fighting a much more widespread enemy. And it does feel like we're playing whack-a-mole lately because of all of the things happening, and trying to drive a clear message to people who are getting selective information, and also just trying not to pay attention, perhaps because the news is so vitriolic, is difficult. But it's a fight that is worth having. We have to do it. And so I'm glad I've been blessed with the opportunity to actually do it, and hopefully make an impact, because it does feel like we're very far behind on this. Again, what is effectively a culture war. In America, that culture war is about whether America is good or evil. So free speech and things like that, those are certainly parts of the culture war, but they all start to manifest into this climax of whether or not your country is even worth having. That's really the debate being had right now. It's a really terrible, terrible debate. And it's a product of decades of postmodernist Marxist thinking that has infiltrated many institutions here. And the KGB was doing this a very long time ago. I mean, it's not all of them, obviously. Like Marxist ideology is it's tempting for a lot of people, I think. The politics of resentment is tempting for a lot of people. And so it's always been there in the human psyche. We unfortunately let it grow. We let it grow for too long. And now we have this cancel culture. We have this tearing down of statues. We have this tearing down of your history, arguing with the history that you can't change. Misinforming people about that history to an extraordinary degree. So the job is difficult because you're battling along many, many fronts, all the while trying to get some basic smart legislation done. But all that legislation, that's a product of the culture war. So you have to fight the culture war first.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that culture war. I mean, I'm watching from over here, but I mean, I'm from America, but it's hard to get my head around what it feels like there. Like you said, monuments coming down, things being canceled out there, sometimes monuments being torn down of abolitionists. And so it definitely feels like there's a lack of understanding of even the history. It's been replaced by kind of rage or anger or cancel or, like you said, a Marxist ideology or a hate of the country. I mean, what are you seeing, and what is the solution to, what is the solution?
Well, education. I mean, education was the problem, and education was the solution. So the unfortunate reality, though, is you can't pretend that solution will be worn out within any time soon. It takes another generation. Cancel culture is not popular. It feels like it's popular because it's the loudest voices clamoring for it. But if you do focus groups and you poll regular people, it's not a popular thing. Nobody really wants to defend Confederate statues, myself included. But I think we draw a very hard line there. We're not going after the founders. The left wants to go after the founders. Why? Because they're founders. And even if a couple of them weren't slaveholders, they would find something else. There's plenty of grievances and interpretations that you can do about history to make you believe that the country itself is evil. Now you take a step back, that's complete nonsense for so many reasons. But it's their goal nevertheless, and because I think their ultimate goal is simply power, and you gain that power and revolution by persuading people that any prosperity they have is ill-begotten, and that the structures and institutions you find yourselves in are sinful to the core and corrupt to the core, and it takes a lot of time to convince people of that. They've done a decent job, as it turns out, and it'll take some time to unconvince them of that. So I mean, we just have to keep putting out the facts and hit their arguments directly, and debunk them directly.
And these calls to defund the police, kind of on the back of that, obviously we've seen a few examples where the police are pulling back or non-existing, when the Chaz that was there and then gone, and we're seeing, more shootings happen in New York City. Where do you stand on that? And do you think the public is starting to understand what happens when the police is ineffective and how dangerous that is? Or do you think we have a long way to go on that?
No, again, much like cancel culture, the public is not on the side of defund the police. That's a wildly left-wing slogan. And what my job is to demonstrate to people that, guys, the Democratic Party is still supporting this radical leftism. The Democratic Party is looking for ways to reimagine policing. So they might come up with some nicer words for it, but in the end, it still means moving money from one place to another. That's what it means, and it means more crime. I like to point out that the left is having all of these battles within their own ranks. Just if you take a step back, all of these cities with problems have been run by Democrats for decades and decades and decades. The history that Democrats are contending with is Democrat history. Republicans have always been the abolitionist party. That was the birth of our party, was as an abolitionist party. We're the ones who voted overwhelmingly for the Civil Rights Act. The Democrats were more split. We freed journalists after progressives jailed journalists under Woodrow Wilson. All their heroes, their progressive heroes, FDR, Wilson, they're the ones who implemented some of these terrible laws and were deeply racist that Democrats are complaining about today. So, we need to do a better job of demonstrating that to people. We've always been the ones who stood right there in the right place, right? Individual liberties, the content of your character matters. The Democrats swing wildly from one side to the other. They've always been about group identity politics. Before they were racist, anti-black, and now the pendulum has swung the opposite direction and moved into the realm of grievance politics, where it's in the end, though, it's still group on group identity politics, and it's still all about power, one group having more power than another. And it's really dangerous, and it's very divisive.
How much of this is amplified because it's an election year, and how much is it that the Democrats see this is their one chance possibly to sway this election, whether it means ruining the economy or being on one side or the other of the COVID argument or supporting these kind of leftist radicals? How much of it is that, or am I being paranoid by saying that?
Yeah, you're being cynical. It's definitely a mix of both. I think the natural left-wing tendency is to push for these things that they push for. It doesn't make it excusable or good, but it's somewhat predictable. For instance, locking down. Remember, if you're on the left, your solution is always the most centralized, top-down. We're all in this together. We're an army of one type of thinking. This is how they think, and across issues. And so it's not that surprising that the only solution they can think of for COVID-19 is to lock everybody in their home. Really, it's the only solution they ever talk about. Even though that should be like step 150 after we've done a lot of incremental solutions in the meantime. It's a different story a bit, but this is how they think. So it's not surprising that that's how they do it. But the blame game, the finger pointing, the this complete ahistorical interpretation of just the last few months of what actually happened and what didn't. That's all political opportunism to a huge extent. They do want to create a sense of chaos and despair before an election, because it doesn't matter who the president is or how much it's the president's fault. When that kind of environment is around you, you tend to vote for the other party, and they know that. And so there's certainly political opportunism happening.
Would they even ruin the economy just to win an election? Like, that would be hard for me to believe a few years ago.
Yeah, but I have heard the Democrat strategists have been quoted saying that kind of thing, that a sharp economic recovery would be their worst nightmare. So, and every single policy that they want to implement is bad for the economy. It's bad for job growth. It's bad for all of it. So they did delay PPP funding twice unnecessarily, to hold out for petty progressive priorities. So they have done it. All the evidence would point to, yes, they don't want an economic recovery. And again, the knee-jerk reaction to go back to lockdowns, like what's happening in California, it's devastating to the economy. It's devastating. But again, this is partly public pressure too. We need to do a better job as a public thinking through our problems and gaining some perspective and thinking without emotion. In my book, I dedicate quite a bit of time to these principles of what I call being still in the face of adversity, and that could carry over to a whole number of things, whether it's interviews, getting blown up by a bomb, getting shot at, like across the spectrum. We should strive to be better and more logical thinkers, but instead we have truly let populist emotions drive our thinking, and demanding the most extreme actions from our politicians, or we'll burn them at the stake and say they did nothing. That's really wrong-headed thinking, and so the media and many in the public have just basically given our politicians only two choices, and it's nothing or full-on lockdown, and we never only had two choices. There's a lot in between, and we have to be smarter and more thoughtful about that, which is why I've long advocated against universal lockdowns. The data doesn't back up that the benefit from them even comes close to outweighing the costs. It's not even close. So, it's not rational thinking.
Do you still find it hard to believe that we locked down in the first place? I mean, based on, like you said, the evidence, and that even now it's a narrative. I mean, I know you've been really vocal talking about what's going on in Texas and how the hospitals are prepared and that there's no reason to do another complete lockdown. But I mean, we locked down here as well, and it was just hard for me to watch. And when you run the numbers, especially people under 60 in the UK that died from COVID, it's like such a small number. I'm just wondering if you've gotten your head around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the initial lockdown can be understood. The 15 days to slow the spread, 2 to 3 weeks, even 4 weeks. You could find me giving a lot more, benefit of the doubt too. Because there was more unknowns at the time. But as those unknowns became knowns, I find the excuses to be pretty weak for continuing universal lockdowns. And again, it doesn't mean do nothing. I'm not saying go have concerts. I think large gatherings being banned, it should be on the table, of course. I'm fine with the mask wearing too. A lot of people think that's an overreach. I don't think so. No, again, I don't think you should be fining somebody. I don't think you should be taking somebody's property because you find them without a mask. I have a problem with that. But as far as the culture of mask wearing, just do it. Like, fine. It prevents you from spitting on somebody, right? So like that's fine. but don't shut down. But it's not businesses and work that is spreading the virus. It's social gatherings. Again, you don't even need. The science says this, of course, but also common sense tells us this. And so the point is that there's a targeted way to deal with this and live side by side with it that we just failed to do. We considerably failed to do. What we did was basically delay the spread of the virus without killing it. And I think that was just a deeply foolish thing to do. Now we had a reason to delay it, was to allow our hospitals to sort of ramp up, understand treatments better. But once that had happened, there's not a lot of excuse for universal shutdown, which costs, because the costs of universal shutdowns are just, even from a specifically health perspective, are pretty dramatic as well, not to mention the job loss and everything else, but all of these things are connected when you're talking about public health. So it's, if politicians failed to rationally think through a cost-benefit analysis in many ways when implementing these policies. And people who are lazy thinkers would just scream, science, science, science. And you're like, I'm sorry, where's the scientific formula that tells you what policy to put in place? There isn't one. That's nonsense. And the science is very messy on this in the midst of a pandemic in real time, talking about complex biology. This is the science doesn't give you a straight answer. It needs to inform your decision making, but so do many other things. This is a multidisciplinary approach that has to happen. And I think lazy policymakers who just wanted to give in to fear and even promote the fear themselves would just felt that they should take the most extreme action possible so that they can never be accused of not doing enough. Because that's always the ultimate fear of a politician. And again, that's they're operating off of incentives, because we have a policy action oriented culture where the government must solve every single problem and do everything for you. Why do you need the government to tell you to go out to a restaurant or not go out to a restaurant? That's baffling to me. But people are asking for it. They're asking to be told. I think that's interesting and sad a little bit. What we need to be doing is informing people. Don't sugarcoat it, but don't fearmonger either. Inform people, give them the tools, tell them what their risk is. I mean, and then move forward with that.
Which kind of comes back to your book a bit. I mean, it kind of goes back to that concept of fortitude, where you kind of want everyone to, like you said, pause, take a deep breath, go into the fear and, I don't know, become more resilient is what you're asking for, right?
Yeah, and one thing, one of the chapters in my book is about heroes. And, who is your hero? And I talk about hero archetypes and sort of I think archetype is the right thing to use as opposed to people. I don't like using examples of great men, because they always have flaws. And again, like it's kind of like the founders. Our founders were heroes, but they had flaws. We built statues and monuments to them and memorialize them because of their heroic attributes. But we don't necessarily ignore their flaws. We're not worshiping them like they're Jesus. Jesus is the only perfect man. But there is nobody else who's perfect. Okay, so a hero archetype is the important thing I think strive for. And hero archetypes are in our movies, they're in our pop culture, they're in our stories. Again, the only real example of one is Jesus, a perfect person. But other than that, every other person is far from perfect. So we need to use archetypes. And what we've done as a culture is flipped our archetypes on their heads. So instead of the Superman, always good judgment, always doing the right thing, always saving the right person, always reacting just the right way, confronting adversity with grace and grit. Now it's totally the opposite. Now Superman needs to be a victim. Otherwise, we would never worship. We would never look up to that person. So it's victimhood has been elevated above all other virtues, and that's very problematic. And it also perhaps explains what we're seeing now, where the leaders who are considered leading well seem to be the ones that go up there and fearmonger and use the most amount of emotion possible or blame others. Like, why does Andrew Cuomo in New York have such high marks? It's a really crazy thing. All he ever did was go up there and blame the president for things. or blame his own mayor, or blame somebody else. It was, if you just take a step back and just kind of analytically watch this unfold, it's very perplexing. Like, why is this type of behavior considered good? And so the person who is most compassionate, most emotional, most empathetic is elevated above somebody who gets up there and is more reasoned, and gives you the costs and the benefits, and maybe tells you, and maybe doesn't coddle to the fear. And I think that's problematic. I think we should not want leaders who are going up and saying we're in a disaster right now, but then people think, well, that one's taking it seriously. I'm with them because I feel like it's a disaster too. But wait a second, did you notice they didn't provide any solutions or actually give us a way forward? Did anybody notice that? I hear Biden chirping all day long on Twitter. We didn't, and he keeps saying over and over again, it didn't have to be this way. It could have been better. It's just like, it's a very populist sentiment. Like, people kind of feel that way because you always feel like it could be better. You want somebody to blame, but it's also very dishonest and destructive, because again, an analytical person would look at what Biden is saying and think, well, you didn't offer any solutions different. Like, there was no point in time, Biden, where you said Trump is doing this, but right now I would be doing this. So that's a fair criticism. If you can look back in time and say, hey, there was a fork in the road, you guys went left, we should have gone right, and I said it back then, that's a fair criticism. Now, the only actual example of that would be January 31st, when President Trump stopped travel from China, or restricted travel from China. Everybody would have done the opposite on the Democrat side. They would have done the opposite. So that's actually the only time where we know for sure that the other side would have done something totally differently, and it would have been a very bad decision. Luckily, they were not in charge. It doesn't mean that President Trump shouldn't have done other things differently. I think he should have blocked off travel from Europe, a week earlier, and really blocked that travel. He didn't, but also nobody was telling him to. And when he did restrict even some travel from Europe, again, he was ridiculed in the press for it. So, we've lost the ability to have analytical, unemotional conversations. And not only that, but when people try, they're diminished. And the people who coddle to fear and I think perpetuate the outrage more, they're elevated as something good. And so this gets back into a deeper cultural conversation about hero archetypes and why are we viewing heroes in the wrong way.
And when I grew up, the hero was someone who went through adversity and thrived, and the victim was never the hero in my day. I mean, I'm 49. And so I'm just wondering, when did that switch and why did that switch? Because it's very obvious now that the victim and the person that was wronged is now this hero, even when they haven't actually done anything except been offended or been victimized. They've shown no resilience and no fortitude. How did that change, and why did that change? Is it because of all this underlying cutting away the culture and the Marxism?
I don't know. I don't explore the origins of outrage culture that much in my book. The book is each chapter is a lesson in how to be more mentally resilient and be that hero you want to be. And so the entire reason I even write about hero archetypes was and I think it's the first, it's not quite the first chapter, but it's the second chapter. It's because you have to envision what you should be, and then you work towards getting there. And basically every other chapter after that is different lessons, whether it's be still, or don't live with a plan B in mind, or learn the proper sense of shame and sense of duty, do something hard every day. All of these are lessons that help you get to that vision of yourself, the right hero archetype. And so I didn't spend a lot of time trying to do a historical analysis of where it came from. And also because I think a lot of books have already done that. But victimhood culture, God, I mean, just off the top of my head, where does it come from? It has been around a long time. Again, Marxism is victimhood culture. It's just a class struggle. What's happened since the 60s in America is that Marxism, because we had a well-off working class that had no desire to revolutionize the whole system, new left thinkers like Herbert Marcuse brought in identity politics into the mix, because they need to find aggrieved groups. And then what they've done over decades and decades and decades is is one, make sure you never solve that group's problems. That's what's really gross about what they do. But also keep telling them that it's the system, it's the institutions, it's the countries as a whole that is keeping you down. You can never succeed. You can never, no matter what you do, you can't succeed. So they're always under their thumb, and it creates resentment, and it creates group identity politics. That's manifested over time, unfortunately. So that's been there a long time, I think. But I think the parents, the people of the 60s had kids, millennials, and I think they've broken through the cultural wall of Americanism. They've broken through that in a way that they have not succeeded in the past. That's the scary part.
When I think of leadership, I usually think of Jocko Willink and his concept of extreme ownership. And I think of him in the field and, that video he has there where he says good to all these crazy things happening, and he doesn't get emotional and he doesn't react, right? I know you know Jocko, you've been on the show a few times, and I first heard about you before you became a congressman on that show. And I'd like to, and I think in the field as a SEAL, that's the kind of leader you want, and that's the kind of leader that keeps you alive. And which makes me wonder, in the core as a human, you must respond to that type of leader, because that's the one that keeps your tribe alive out in the wild, wherever you are. So it's strange that, in politics, people try to cater to a different type of leadership. I don't know. Is that a weird observation for me to make?
No. Well, that's the observation I was making. Yeah. I mean, it's completely right. And perplexing, and I haven't quite figured it out. Empathy, empathy is a big part of leadership. So people are always looking for somebody who empathizes with them. So that's part of it. And if you show fear as a leader and you express, I think, what am I seeing these days? I guess express, what's the right word? I don't know, like a sense of chaos, right? Like kind of hair on fire rhetoric. Like we're on the precipice of, you get on a press conference and you say we're on the precipice of disaster, because I was criticizing local leaders who would say things like that. And then I'd get criticized back, like, how dare you? I'm like, what do you mean, how dare I? Why would you ever want a leader in a hard situation to speak like that? You want somebody who's steadfast, who's calm, doesn't use excessive language like this, because it's not useful. It might make you feel like they empathize with you because you're a little scared and they're scared and they're expressing fear and emotion, and you feel that fear and emotion, and so you're drawn to them. So that's why it happens, because again, people feel emotional connections, and leaders need to have that emotional connection, but leaders also need to think of the bigger picture and show good judgment. Riling people up is not good. I can't believe I have to say that, but I do have to say that.
Yeah. Do you ever think about your reaction to, the Saturday Night Live skit where a lot of people would have been the victim? A lot of people could have turned that into a big media scare, and how dare they? But I saw your interviews after that, and you weren't that way. You kind of had that fortitude, and that probably got you invited on the show, and that probably led to a lot of things. Do you ever deconstruct that situation? And am I right in making that observation?
Yeah. I analyzed that whole thing in the book, on the chapter called A Sense of Shame, because my analysis of the word shame in our current culture is that we do it wrong. We do it wrong on a cultural level as far as shaming others, and we do it wrong on a personal micro level. So on a cultural level, that's how the Saturday Night Live skit plays into it, because you could have easily seen that move in a different direction where we shame them excessively and play that aggrieved victim. And that would have been the normal track for things, but we didn't do that, and therefore they allowed me on the show and we made something good out of it. Now, they definitely wouldn't have done that if I had.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.